Hi, my friends. Welcome back to another Get Ready With Me. My name is Soraya, and if you're here, that means you're going to hang out with me, sip on a nice drink, and we're going to go over another true crime story. If you haven't already noticed, I am already ready for the day. I got ahead a little bit of you, but that still doesn't mean that we can hang out, and I'm actually excited to tell you about today's story. Since today is going to be a bit of a different kind of scenario where I don't do my makeup with you guys, I will still be doing some touch-ups, and I'll actually be introducing a mocktail. This will be my first mocktail of the series, and I think you guys will genuinely try it, and it is summer inspired. Let's go ahead and introduce our drink. All right, so first things first, we are going to get our cup of ice for our summer drink. And about today's story, it's going to be about a military case that is something I've never heard of, and it is definitely eerie, has me thinking about it still, and it's just definitely one of those things where it is just very confusing. But moving on to back to our drink, it is going to be something with caffeine in case you're looking for something for a pick-me-up. So disclaimer there for some caffeine. And we are going to be using a coconut Red Bull, which is my favorite. All right, so first base of our mocktail for today, we're going to get some ASMR with our drink. My favorite. Go ahead and grab our cup. Now, I only did pour a little bit because we're actually going to be adding some pineapple mango juice to make it a little bit more tropical. So let's add that in. Oof. Okay, this thing is heavy. I always have this on deck, but we are not going to pour this whole thing in there. We are just going to top off our mocktail with a little bit of ginger ale. Okay, I cannot hold this in my cup, so I'm just going to do this off camera. Okay, so our drink should be looking like this with a little bit of fizz on top. You have the preference of either shaking or stirring your drink. Taste test. Yes, this is so refreshing. I'm so ready to get into today's story. Go ahead and set the setting of the story today, which is going to be about the 90s. Now, this is when our economy is comfortable. People are starting to get phones that fit in their pockets. Technology is growing. Social media is being created. And on the military spectrum, there are thousands of service members who are trying to combine military life and their own personal life at home. All right, so I am not an expert on military history or history overall, but since our story will take place in 1992, it is important to note that the Cold War had just ended, and there is tensions that are high throughout the Korean Peninsula, if I'm saying that correctly. And with that being said, there are several military people that are spread out through Germany to North or South Korea, in military facilities across the US. Go ahead and do your own research if you are into that. We'll begin with our military police officer, Chad Langford. All right, so starting off with Chad, he did join the military in 1990, and he would be in his early 20s at this time. There was not a lot of information about his upbringing or childhood, but what we do know is that Chad had been raised by his father and grandmother in Northern California, and that he would join the Army just straight out of high school. All right, so before I continue telling the story, I did forget to put my little mocktail ingredients away. Let me know if you guys enjoy it. Even leave me a comment down below if you guys ended up trying this drink, but I'll be right back. Let me just put these away. Okay, I am back. Of course, if you guys are still following along, at this time when he had enlisted, the Army would choose to station Chad in South Korea. And with his time out there, he had done good for himself. He had gotten several conduct medals where he would start to build a good reputation for himself. All right, with Chad having his time spent over there, he would eventually reach the end of his tour of duty, and Chad would join the military police in Redstone Arsenal, Alabama. We can say that family would mention that Chad loved the Army life and that he would even plan to re-enlist. There had been some concerns about his behavior towards his final days, which of course we did not know about until it was too late, and now we're going on to the details of the case. Before I go into them, I feel like I need a little refresher. I'm going to refresh my skin with this spray. Before I'm sorry, I kind of scared myself getting close to you guys. One thing I like to mention is I wonder if I need to start putting disclaimers on my videos. So let's go ahead and input that now. Let's go ahead and try. I have a little tiny microphone. Warning. This discussion contains references to suicide, murder, violence, and even death. Viewer and participant discretion is advised. Okay, I hope I did a good job and I didn't scare you on how serious I had looked for you guys. All right, so now on March 12th of 1992, Chad was finishing up what should have been a typical routine patrol of his army base in Huntsville, Alabama. This could mean that Chad is securing the area or deterring hostile activity, typical procedures that you imagine the army or military would do. However, within just 30 minutes of this routine, Chad had radioed his space station to report that he was going to investigate something suspicious, and this was about a nearby abandoned car. So it was pretty usual to send over backup when you have a soldier reporting that they're going to investigate something suspicious, and that is what the Army had decided to do. They would send an officer. Now, the officers or his team were not that far from him, and the officer had arrived within minutes, and the officer had arrived and he would report this to be a very bizarre scene. When I was researching this story, I would agree that describing it to be bizarre was totally correct, because it is that Chad's military ID tag, his armband, and his portable police radio had been placed perfectly in the middle of the street. Now, I don't mean just that they were there. They were perfectly staged. You have to envision that it is his portable radio just standing up with, and there was his dog tag. It had his name on it, where you can see it just right here in this little corner. And you have the armband kind of like swooped over the police radio, just very beautifully aesthetically placed, which is very odd. With this perfect scene of Chad's items found in the middle of the street, of course, Chad was nowhere nearby, and there was just simply no sign of him. The backup officer would, of course, go out looking for Chad, and it had only been a quarter of a mile away that he had found him. The next following details is very important because, of course, the officer is shocked to have found Chad. Chad's head would be bleeding and he had barely been breathing. In the Army, it's normal for soldiers to have the cap and like their jacket with like kind of like those pants that are kind of baggy, and his boots. However, Chad's hat would be found stuffed inside his mouth, and the cord of his radar unit would have been wrapped around his neck. Another thing to note too is that soldiers do tend to carry a sort of holster of some kind where they carry their guns in, of course, and a set of handcuffs. With Chad, they had found that his pistol strap had been tied around his ankles, and his handcuffs would have only been clamped onto his left wrist. Now, when the backup officer had gotten close to examine or check on him, we had found a message on the palm of Chad's hand. Oof, I don't know if you guys are ready for the next details of what was written on his hand, and I'm getting pretty low on my drink as well. If you guys want to take this moment to go get a refill, I highly advise you do. But going back to what was on his hand, it had clearly stated the words March 3rd and the next set of line of writing, and it is not clear or confirmed that it is what it says, because it's a bit ineligible. You have to remember that is the word Robert. Now, I hope you guys can remember or recall that I mentioned that soldiers tend to carry guns with them, and Chad had a .45 caliber that he would carry with him, and the question is, where is his gun at this point? Now, his gun had been found underneath his left shoulder, and it is tucked away as if he had landed on it. It is genuinely something that they would have to pull out from underneath him. Now that it is confirmed that we did find Chad's gun, ballistic experts would enter the scene. Now, if you don't know what ballistic experts are, is that they are specialists in analyzing firearms and ammo in reconstructing shooting incidents, and it was confirmed by them that 2 shots had been fired from his own gun, but they could not confirm if either or had hit Chad or if they had landed anywhere else. Now, I can't really remember if I had mentioned it or not, but when he had been found by the backup officer, Chad was barely breathing, so barely alive. They had rushed him to the hospital, but unfortunately he had died just about 2 hours later. Before we move on into further details of the story, I hope that you guys can start construing this scene as I see it. It ultimately comes out to be very suspicious, from the writing on the hand to the way that his body had been placed, and of course with him reporting that he was going to investigate a suspicious scene. It's just something to keep in the back burner of your mind as I continue telling the story, and kind of sort of help you make your own conclusions or your own opinions on what may have occurred. All right, so it had only been a few more months that Chad Langford would turn barely about 21 years old. But with this information and unfortunate death of the Army's soldier, the Army would eventually go ahead and rule this incident to be a suicide. Now, yes, you did hear me right. The Army would go ahead and indicate this incident to be a suicide. Jim Langford, which is Chad's father, did happen to mention that there had been a change in his son's behavior, and the Army would go on to report many other information that they opinionated would contribute for them to rule this incident to be a suicide. So going back to Jim Langford, he would mention that back in January that Chad had mentioned to him that he had been asked to do some undercover work. He would call then and there and provide such little details about the work that he was working on. And one day Jim had just asked him if he could just get a straight answer, and he would simply just state that it was guns and drugs. Jim would also mention that it was about 2 or 3 times that Chad had stated that if he was found out, that he would be a dead man. Naturally, of course, Jim would advise his son that he needed to get out of this situation, and Chad would just respond by him saying that he simply can't or he couldn't. It seems that my drink is running low, which I will go ahead and go get a refill. And my lighting seems to have changed too, but I'll be right back and we'll continue with our story. Alrighty, I am back with my refill. My drink is looking prettier than ever and much more refreshing. But going back to Jim did urge Chad to talk to his undercover superior, and Chad had told him that he would not be able to see him for another 2 weeks. But of course, within those 2 weeks, Chad would be found bleeding with a fatal wound to the head. One important note to know about the Army is that they do have their own separate criminal investigation division, also known as SID, and they had reviewed Chad's death for about 4 months, and the report had also included that he had gotten a psychological autopsy. This is a post-mortem evaluation of mental health on the victim. They had reported that Chad had serious and lifelong emotional problems. I am not sure how this is performed, but the family had denied that this would be true. It is kind of raising some concerns here on their evaluation and their own criminal investigation. While also looking further into their report, they had added that it had been motivated by a recent breakup with his girlfriend. One thing to note is that Chad had been dating a girl named Roxanne, and she herself even disagreed that their breakup was going to be a trigger for him. She had stated that he had broken up with her, and she had felt on her own that it felt as if someone was telling him to break it off with her. She even stated that she was confident that it had been some sort of protection that Chad was giving, as if to set her up for something in the future. She also did mention that the last time that she had seen Chad, his behavior had dramatically changed, and also in his appearance. They had also been out at a bar, and he seemed to be hanging out with gang-like members and men she had never seen before, and he had just become very dependent on them, and she would be advised to stay away from them and to simply leave him alone. Continuing with this suspicion of these rough-looking men that Chad had been hanging out with, going back to the report that the Army had input for Chad's death, they also reported and claimed that Chad was planning to steal from the Army PX, and they had several interviews that they did with 3 other soldiers to prove that that is something that he was plotting to do. I need to refresh myself because this case is getting frustrating. I hope you guys are sort of on the same page as I am. Going back to the psychological autopsy that the report had stated, they continued to put comments on that Chad had self-esteem and that he was desperate to create a new image for himself. They also went ahead and had reported that his intent of calling in this investigation of suspicion had been fake and a false report, that it was simply a stage for him to he had planned to commit suicide and wanted to plot it off as a potential murder instead. One important note to include here as you're making your conclusions and opinions about this story, the family had advocated for as much information as they can, but we must consider the fact that it is time consuming and resources to be able to get much out of the Army to be able to reinvestigate or to relook into the story, and they did their best that they could. Their family does not believe that suicide is something that Chad had done, and they also advocate for the fact that the military police had missed many opportunities to question other suspects that night. Also, the abandoned vehicle, they did not take any DNA. There is no evidence to tie to Chad to provide justice on the potential that he may have been murdered. And as I mentioned about the suspects, there had been vehicles that were driving by in the area. There had been 2 other different vehicles within a mile of where Chad had been found, and those drivers or those people had not been questioned anything about Chad. It is very frustrating how a missed opportunity of a crime scene of what could lead us more to the truth. We have now reached the end of the story. It simply was ruled a suicide. The family did not have enough time and resources and money to continue to push this case to be resolved. All they had done on their part is to spread awareness, spread information, and they did go ahead and somewhat succeed by getting this story on a show that goes over true crime stories. Now, the story was about a separate soldier, which I'm kind of curious that I should probably do on or kind of investigate a little more. It's somewhat very sad and interesting story. However, the Army did go ahead and reopen the case because of this show, and they had not followed up any public information about what they had discovered following the information about Chad, or if they had even found any other suspect or had arrested anyone on behalf of Chad's death. Overall, my thoughts are that this is potentially a murder, I like to say. None of the things point for it to be a potential suicide. Again, we do not know at the end of the day what Chad had gone through or what he had been working on with this undercover work. But let's go ahead and talk about it in the comments below. Send me all your thoughts. I can ramble on for days or for hours about what may have happened. And technically, today's story is unsolved till this day. Again, I'm so happy you got to hang out with me today. I hope you guys enjoyed today's mocktail. It is definitely a pick-me-up. It is so hot outside for the summer. I hope this refreshed you. I hope that you guys didn't mind that I didn't do my makeup or got ready with you, but it was still so nice to hang out. I will go ahead and see you in the next one. And yeah, let's go ahead and talk about it some more, and we'll see each other soon. Hi guys, coming in here because I have lost sunlight and I had not realized how long this video was going to take, but I wanted to come in here because I had forgotten to add this in. But I am already have a preview for next time's video because I recently went thrifting and I had found this book. It is called A Love to Die For. and it is the chilling true crime story of the youngest woman on death row. I will genuinely read this and have this be my next video, so go ahead and stay tuned. And yeah, I am very intrigued to find out what this case is about. I'm pretty excited to see you guys soon again. Please take care of one another, and thanks again for staying for some extra credits. Bye.